He pulled away when she needed him most, but the cry of their unborn daughter made him confront everything he had spent his entire life trying to avoid. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post daily. Continuing, the cold July wind cut through the streets of London when Raphael Maxwell left his office that Thursday. At 32, he commanded a business empire his great-grandfather had built brick by brick, but he carried on his shoulders a weight that money had never been able to alleviate. Every step he took along the wet pavements of Notting Hill echoed with the same heavy rhythm that had marked his entire life, the cadence of an ancestral guilt he believed he carried in his blood. The rain began to fall harder as he turned the corner onto Portobello Road, where the art gallery he had frequented for 3 years was located, not for love of art, but because of her. Marina Sinclair, a visual arts professor, owner of a smile that seemed capable of dissolving even the reinforced concrete of the surrounding buildings. Her brown eyes held a depth that simultaneously frightened and attracted him, as if they could see through the layers of protection he had built over decades. Marina was arranging the last paintings of the exhibition when she saw him standing in the doorway, dripping rainwater, with that intense, melancholic gaze that made her forget to breathe. She knew that expression. It was the same one he wore when he spoke about business, about responsibilities, about anything but himself. Raphael Maxwell was a man who lived in the third person, as if his own life were a corporate report to be managed. "Are you going to stand there soaking the gallery floor, or are you coming in?" she asked, trying to hide the smile that always appeared when he arrived. Raphael entered slowly, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the light wooden floor. The atmosphere was welcoming, lit by directed spotlights that highlighted the exhibited works. That place had something his mansion in Kensington never did. Life, vibrant colors, bold textures, expressions that screamed emotions he had never allowed himself to feel. "The exhibition is beautiful," he said, stopping before an abstract painting in shades of blue and gold. "You have a special talent for transforming pain into beauty." Marina approached, drying her hands on her paint-stained apron. "This work is about new beginnings, about how sometimes we need to shatter completely to rebuild ourselves in a better way." He glanced at her. "And you believe that it's possible to rebuild?" "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Raphael fell silent for a moment, lost in the golden swirls of the canvas. "There are things that mark us so deeply they become part of who we are. Scars that don't heal, they just hide." Marina felt a tightening in her chest. In the 3 years they had known each other, Raphael always spoke in riddles, as if he carried secrets too heavy to share. She knew he came from a traditionally wealthy family, that he had lost his mother very early, that he had been raised by a distant father and a succession of nannies. But there was something more, something he kept locked away in a dark place in his soul. "Raphael," she said softly, touching his arm. "What happened to you?" He turned to face her, and for a moment Marina saw something break in those dark eyes. It was as if a wall was crumbling, revealing a wounded boy he had kept hidden for decades. "My mother died when I was born," he said, his voice hoarse, "and my grandmother too. She died in childbirth, when my father was born. It's a curse on our family, Marina. The women who marry Maxwell men, they die giving birth." Marina felt the world stop around her. "Raphael. My father told me when I turned 18. He said it was my responsibility to know, so I could protect any woman I came to love." He laughed bitterly. Protection, as if love could be controlled, measured, kept at a safe distance. "But that's—" Marina struggled to find the right words. "That's just a terrible coincidence. 2 women, 2 tragedies separated by a generation." 3 women, Raphael corrected her. "My great-grandmother too. It's always been this way in our family. That's why my father never remarried. That's why my grandfather was widowed at 25 and died alone. That's why you what?" Raphael stepped away from her, walking to the window overlooking the street. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained cloudy, grey like the thoughts that clouded his mind. "That's why I should never have gotten close to you." The words came out as a whisper, but Marina heard them clearly. She felt as if someone had ripped the air from her lungs. "Raphael, look at me." He didn't turn. "Look at me," she repeated, more firmly. When he finally faced her, Marina saw tears he refused to shed. "You don't understand, Marina. I love you. I love you so much it physically hurts. But if you ever get pregnant, if you ever want to have children," he shook his head, "I can't. I can't bear another death on my conscience." Marina approached him slowly, like one approaching a wounded animal. "Raphael, my love, you are not responsible for your mother's death, nor your grandmother's, nor anyone's. You don't understand," he said, pulling away again. "It's a curse. It's real. It's fear," Marina interrupted him. "It's fear transformed into belief. It's pain transformed into a prison." Raphael closed his eyes, as if her words were physical blows. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I work with art, Raphael. I work with expression, with emotion, with how people transform trauma into narrative, and you've turned your mother's death into a horror story that keeps you from living." "It's not a story," he exploded, turning to her with blazing eyes. "It's my family's reality. It's the weight I carry every single day. It's the reason I wake up every morning knowing I can't afford to—" "To what? To be happy? To have a family? To live?" Marina was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched him crumble before her eyes. "I can't put you at risk," he said, his voice broken. "I can't." "And who said that's your choice?" The question hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither knew if they should cross. Marina wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of dry paint on her face. "Raphael, have you ever considered the possibility that you might be wrong? That perhaps medicine has evolved since your great-grandmother's time? That maybe there are medical explanations for what happened?" "I've researched it," he said softly. "I've read everything I could find. Some families do have genetic predispositions to obstetric complications. Some women are more prone to—" "Some women, not all. And predisposition is not a death sentence." Raphael sat in one of the gallery's armchairs, burying his face in his hands. "But you don't understand the weight of waking up every day, knowing your existence cost your father the life of the most important person to him, living, knowing he looks at you and sees the woman he lost." Marina knelt before him, placing her hands over his. "Did your father tell you that?" "He didn't have to say it. I saw it in his eyes. I still do." "Raphael, are you sure you're not projecting your own guilt onto his reaction?" He lifted his face to look at her. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a boy who grew up blaming himself for something completely out of his control. A boy who turned a tragedy into an identity, and who now, as a man, uses that identity to protect himself from any possibility of loss." Raphael was silent for a long moment, processing her words. Outside, the sun began to peek through the clouds, creating plays of light and shadow in the gallery. "What if you're wrong?" he finally asked. "What if the curse is real? What if I lose you?" Marina held his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "And what if I'm right? What if you're wasting the only life you have because of an unfounded fear? What if we're wasting the chance to be happy together?" Raphael closed his eyes, feeling her touch like an anchor in the midst of the storm he had always carried within him. "I'm so scared, Marina. So scared." "I know. But fear can't rule our lives forever." When he opened his eyes again, there was something different in them. It wasn't relief, it wasn't healing, but it was hope. A fragile hope, the size of a strand of hair, but real. "If I asked you to marry me," he said slowly, "knowing all this, and knowing the risk—" "Raphael Maxwell," Marina interrupted him, smiling through her tears, "are you proposing to me in the middle of an existential crisis?" He laughed for the first time in weeks. "I guess so." "Then the answer is yes, but with one condition." "What?" "You promise that you'll fight this fear with me, that you won't let it decide our future, that if at some point life gives us the opportunity to have a family, you'll trust medicine, trust me, and trust the possibility that sometimes things can work out." Raphael hesitated. It was harder to promise that than any contract he had ever signed in his career. "I promise I'll try." That's enough to start. They married 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the art gallery garden. Marina wore a dress she had painted herself, with abstract flowers in shades of blue and gold that changed color with the light. Raphael cried during his vows, something that surprised everyone present, including himself. The first years of marriage were the happiest of Raphael's life. Marina brought color to his gloomy mansion, filled the silent corridors with laughter and late-night conversations. She converted one of the rooms into a studio and covered the white walls with vibrant canvases that told the story of a woman who loved a man haunted by ghosts. Raphael learned to laugh again, to see beauty in small things, to wake up every day eager to discover what new surprise Marina had prepared. She had a unique way of seeing the world, finding magic in everyday situations and transforming simple moments into precious memories. For 3 years, he believed he might have broken the cycle, that their love was strong enough to overcome any curse, that Marina was right about modern medicine, about coincidences, about the possibility of new beginnings, until the morning she walked into his home office, a pregnancy test in her hand and tears of happiness in her eyes. "Raphael," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "we're having a baby." And in that moment, all the progress he had made, all the happiness he had built, all the hope he had cultivated, collapsed like a house of cards. Fear returned with full force, bringing with it all the voices of the dead he carried in his memory. His mother, his grandmother, his great-grandmother, all dead in childbirth. And now Marina. "Raphael," she called, approaching him carefully. "My love, are you all right?" He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't do anything but stare at that test and see in it a death sentence. The curse had returned to exact its price. The silence that followed the pregnancy announcement was so profound that Marina could hear her own heart beating erratically in her chest. Raphael stood before her like a statue, his eyes fixed on the test she held, but his mind clearly elsewhere. In another time, at another funeral. "Raphael," she repeated, reaching out to touch his arm. He recoiled as if her touch burned him. I need to go to work. It's 7 in the morning on a Saturday. I have an important meeting." Marina knew it was a lie. Raphael never lied to her about work. He could omit his feelings, his worries, his fears, but he never fabricated professional commitments. "All right," she said slowly, tucking the test into her robe pocket. "We'll talk when you get back then." Raphael nodded without looking at her and left the office as if fleeing a fire. Marina stood there for long minutes, listening to the sound of his car leaving the garage, feeling something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the morning sickness she had started to feel. She knew this reaction would come. She had prepared for it during their 3 years of marriage, mentally rehearsing how they would handle the news of a pregnancy when the time came. But she never imagined it would be like this. She never imagined Raphael would simply disappear. Raphael drove aimlessly through the empty streets of London, letting autopilot take him to familiar places while his mind got lost in a labyrinth of memories he preferred to keep locked away. He eventually stopped at Highgate Cemetery, where his mother was buried. He hadn't visited the grave in over 5 years, but his feet automatically led him to the white marble headstone with Eleanor Maxwell engraved in gold letters. "Hi, Mum," he whispered, kneeling on the damp grass. "I know it's been a while. I tried to stay away because it hurt too much, but now," his voice broke, "now I need you." The wind rustled the surrounding trees, creating a whispering symphony that almost sounded like a response. Raphael closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember the little he knew about Eleanor. He only had 2 photographs of her, one from her wedding to his father, where she smiled radiantly in a lace dress, and another where she was pregnant, her hands caressing her prominent belly, her eyes shining with anticipated happiness. "Dad told me you were so excited to meet me," he murmured, tracing the letters of her name with his finger. "That you had already chosen my name, decorated the room, bought baby clothes. That you died happy because you managed to give birth to me before—" He swallowed hard. "Marina is pregnant, Mum, and I'm so scared I can't even look at her." He stayed there for over an hour, talking to the headstone, as if Eleanor could somehow hear him across the barrier between life and death. He told her about Marina, about how she had brought light into his dark life, about how for the first time he had believed things could be different, and about how now everything was falling apart again. When he finally returned home, it was late afternoon. Marina was in the studio, painting with furious and precise movements on a canvas that seemed to be on fire with so much red color. She didn't look up when she heard him enter. "How was the meeting?" she asked without stopping painting. Raphael hesitated at the door. Marina, Was it productive? Did you close any important deals? Marina, please. She finally turned to him, and Raphael saw that she had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, but her gaze was firm, determined. 3 years, Raphael. 3 years pretending this conversation wouldn't happen. 3 years I prepared myself to give you strength, to help you overcome this fear, to prove to you that we would be all right. She dropped the paintbrush into a bowl of water, which immediately turned red. And when it finally happens, you run away. You literally run away from me. I didn't run away. Then what was it? Raphael sat in one of the studio's armchairs, avoiding looking at the canvases Marina had painted over the years. They were all autobiographical, he knew, her life expressed in colors and forms that told stories without words. I was scared, he finally admitted. I know. And what's wrong with that? I'm scared too. Raphael looked at her, surprised. You are? Marina laughed without humor. Of course I am, Raphael. It's my first pregnancy. I don't know if I'll be a good mother, if I'll know how to care for a baby, if my body will cope. I'm terrified. But do you know the difference between my fear and yours? What? My fear is about the future. Yours is about the past. Her words hit Raphael like a punch to the gut. Marina. And the past has already happened, Raphael. We can't change it. We can't let it destroy our present. Raphael was silent for a moment, observing the red canvas she had been painting. It was a woman, he realized. A lonely woman, her arms outstretched towards something that wasn't on the canvas. Is that you? He asked, pointing to the painting. It's any woman who has ever loved someone who prefers to live in the past rather than fight for the present. The coldness in her voice scared him more than any shout could have. Raphael stood up and tried to approach, but Marina raised her hand to stop him. No, not now. I need to process this alone. Marina, please, let's talk. Talk about what? About how you're going to pretend everything's fine while you count the days until I die. About how you'll treat me like I'm made of glass until the birth. About how you'll blame me if something goes wrong. I would never blame you. No. Then why did you disappear all day? Why can't you even look at me properly since you heard the news? Raphael opened his mouth to protest, but realized she was right. Since morning, he had avoided any eye contact with Marina, as if looking at her would confirm the death sentence he believed had been pronounced. I'm going to make an appointment with an obstetrician, Marina said, turning to wash her brushes in the small sink in the studio. I'll do all the necessary exams. I'll take care of my health and the baby's health, and if you want to be a part of it, great. If you don't, she shrugged, I'll do it alone. Marina, don't say that. Why? What's the difference? You've already decided I'm going to die anyway, so what's the point of participating? Raphael felt tears burn his eyes. Because I love you. Marina stopped washing the brushes and turned slowly to him. If you loved me, you would trust me. You would trust medicine. You would trust the possibility that sometimes, just sometimes, things can work out. I trust you. No, you don't. You only trust your fear. That night, they slept in the same room, in the same bed, but they might as well have been on different planets. Raphael stayed awake late, listening to Marina's breathing, wanting to touch her belly where the baby was growing, but feeling paralyzed by the terror that every caress could be an early farewell. Marina didn't sleep either. She pretended to be asleep, so she wouldn't have to face another circular conversation about fears and curses. For the first time since they met, she questioned if she had made the right choice marrying Raphael. Not because she didn't love him, but because she was beginning to realize that their love might not be strong enough to overcome the demons he carried. The following days established a painful pattern of coexistence. Raphael left early for work and returned late, immersing himself in meetings and projects as if trying to forget he had a personal life. Marina booked her first obstetric appointment alone and went alone, returning home with ultrasound images that showed a tiny speck that would be their child. She left the images on the kitchen table, where Raphael would surely see them. When she returned from the studio at the end of the day, the photos were gone. She didn't know if he had taken them to the office or simply thrown them away. She didn't have the courage to ask. How was the appointment? Raphael asked during dinner, the first time he had mentioned the pregnancy since the announcement. Normal, Everything's fine with the baby. 8 weeks. 8 weeks, he repeated, as if calculating something in his head. The doctor said I can continue painting, but I have to be careful with solvents, and I need to take folic acid. All right. Anything you need. It was a polite conversation between two strangers, not between a husband and wife expecting a child. Marina felt something definitively break inside her. Raphael, this can't continue. He stopped stirring his food and looked at her. What are you talking about? This distance, this way of acting as if I'm a ghost. I'm not acting. Yes, you are. You barely talk to me. You barely touch me. You can't even be in the same room as me for more than 10 minutes. Raphael sighed, dropping his fork. Marina, I just need time to process all this. Time to process or time to get used to the idea that I'm going to die. Don't talk like that. Why not? It's what you're thinking, isn't it? Every time you look at me, you see your mother. Every time you think about the baby, you see a funeral. Raphael abruptly stood up from the table. I'm going to finish eating in the office. Of course you are. Run away again. It's what you do best. He stopped at the kitchen door, his shoulders tense. I'm not running away. Yes, you are. You're running from me, from the baby, from the possibility of us being happy. You're running from life. Raphael didn't answer. He simply picked up his plate and left the kitchen, leaving Marina alone with the deafening silence that had become the soundtrack of their marriage. That night, Marina made a decision. If Raphael couldn't be present for what could be the most important period of their lives, if he preferred to live tormented by ghosts of the past rather than build a future together, then perhaps it was time for her to protect herself and the baby. She spent the entire night writing a letter, not a farewell letter, but one of protection. A letter explaining that she needed space to experience this pregnancy without the constant weight of his fear, that she needed to be in an environment where she could be happy about the baby's arrival instead of living in constant expectation of tragedy. When dawn broke, Raphael had already left for another day of compulsive work. Marina packed a suitcase with clothes for a few weeks, put her painting supplies in a box, and called her sister in Brighton. Hi, Clara. It's me. Can I stay at your place for a while? She left the letter on their bed, next to the ultrasound images Raphael had hidden. She locked the house that had been her home for 3 years and drove towards the coast, carrying in her chest a mixture of relief and sadness that made her cry and breathe better at the same time. When Raphael returned from work that night and found the house empty, for a moment he felt relief. He wouldn't have to pretend everything was all right. He wouldn't have to avoid looking at Marina's belly. He wouldn't have to deal with the guilt of not being the husband she deserved. But when he read the letter, when he saw her words written with the same delicacy with which she painted her canvases, when he understood that Marina had left not out of anger, but out of self-preservation, Raphael realized he had achieved exactly what he had always feared, losing the woman he loved. The difference was that, this time, she was still alive to hate him for it. Raphael read the letter 3 times before he could fully process what was happening. Marina had left, not out of anger, not on impulse, but by a carefully considered decision to protect herself and the baby from the toxicity he had created around their pregnancy. You taught me that love shouldn't be a death sentence, one of the letter's passages read. But that's exactly what our relationship has become since I found out about the baby. I feel like a condemned woman awaiting execution, and I can't live like this anymore. His words from years ago came back to haunt him. I love you so much it physically hurts, but if you ever get pregnant, if you ever want to have children, I can't. And now exactly what he had always feared had happened, but not in the way he had imagined. He hadn't lost Marina to death. He had lost her to his own cowardice. During the first 3 days after Marina's departure, Raphael plunged even deeper into work. He arrived at the office at 6 in the morning and only left when the building's security guards made their last round. He slept on the leather sofa in his office, ate coffee and sandwiches his secretary bought, and avoided at all costs returning to the empty mansion in Kensington. But on the 4th night, as he was reviewing contracts he had already read 5 times, exhaustion finally won. Raphael fell asleep at his office desk and was woken by a nightmare he hadn't had in years. He dreamed of his mother, but this time she spoke to him. She said he had misunderstood everything, that he had misinterpreted the story, that he was wasting his chance to be happy because of a lie he himself had constructed. He woke with his heart pounding and a strange certainty that he needed to go home, not to escape the pain, but to face it once and for all. The mansion was exactly as Marina had left it. Her paintings still decorated the walls. The plants she cared for were beginning to wilt from lack of watering, and the studio still held the characteristic smell of paint and solvent that always accompanied her. Raphael walked through the rooms like a ghost visiting his old life, touching objects that belonged to her, feeling her absence in every corner. It was when he went up to the attic in search of a suitcase that he remembered his great-grandfather's private library. There were entire rooms filled with books, documents, and memorabilia of the Maxwell family that he rarely visited. Perhaps it was there he could find more information about the deaths that haunted his lineage. Perhaps he could better understand the pattern he believed existed. The attic was dusty and dimly lit, but Raphael knew every corner of that space. He had played there as a child, hidden among boxes during games of hide-and-seek with nannies. Now, as an adult, he saw the place with different eyes, not as a magical hideaway, but as an archive of family history. He spent hours sifting through old documents, birth and death certificates, newspaper clippings, photographs yellowed by time. He confirmed the dates he already knew by heart. Eleanor Maxwell died at 25, complications in childbirth. Maria Maxwell, his grandmother, died at 22, postpartum hemorrhage. Carol Maxwell, his great-grandmother, died at 26, puerperal infection. 3 women, 3 generations, 3 deaths related to childbirth. The pattern seemed indisputable, the curse unquestionable. Raphael was about to close the last box of documents when he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A sealed envelope with feminine handwriting, hidden beneath a pile of ancient deeds. His name was written on the front, for Raphael, when you are ready for the truth. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and found several letters written by his great-grandmother Carol, dated a few months before her death. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but the ink was still legible. "My dear great-grandson," the first letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you have managed to find the words I never had the courage to say in life. There is a lie being perpetuated in our family, a terrible myth that needs to be undone before it destroys more lives." Raphael sat on a dusty chair, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it echoing in the silence of the attic. He continued reading with a mixture of anxiety and hope he hadn't felt in weeks. "There is no curse, my dear. There never was." What there were 3 separate medical tragedies, in different eras for different reasons. "I died of infection because there were no adequate antibiotics in 1890. Your grandmother Maria died because the doctor who attended her was intoxicated and did not know how to deal with a hemorrhage that today would be easily controlled. Your mother Eleanor died from a congenital heart condition that neither she nor your father knew existed." The words danced before Raphael's eyes. He had to stop reading for a moment to breathe, feeling as if a 100-pound weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I discovered the truth through the medical records I managed to obtain before I died," the letter continued. "Each of us died for a specific reason, unrelated to the others. But your great-grandfather, my dear husband, could not accept that my death was just bad luck. He needed a greater explanation, something that would give meaning to the pain he felt. And so the story of the curse was born." Raphael moved on to the second letter, his hands trembling so much it was difficult to hold the paper. "I tried to convince my son, your grandfather, that there was no hereditary pattern. I brought doctors to explain, showed him the records I had collected, but the pain of losing his mother had transformed into something greater in his mind. The curse became a way to honor our memory, to transform tragedy into an epic narrative. He preferred to believe we were martyrs of a cruel fate rather than victims of medical circumstances." In the third letter, Carol addressed Raphael directly. "If you, my great-grandson, are reading these words, it is because the lie has reached your generation. Please, do not allow this to happen to your children. Medicine has evolved enormously since my time. Women no longer routinely die in childbirth. You can have the family you desire without carrying the weight of our ghosts." The last letter was more personal. "I know you will carry guilt for being born on the day your mother died. All the men in our family have carried this guilt. Your great-grandfather blamed himself for my death, your grandfather for Maria's death, your father for Eleanor's death. But, my dear, you are not responsible for our deaths. You are responsible for your lives, and for the lives of the women you choose to love." Raphael finished reading the letters with tears streaming down his face, each word re-signifying decades of guilt and fear. The entire castle of terror he had built in his mind crumbled before the simple and painful truth. He had wasted years of his life, and possibly lost the woman he loved because of a lie his own great-grandmother had tried to undo over a century ago. He picked up the phone and called his father, who answered, surprised by the late-night call. "Raphael, is something wrong?" "Dad, I found great-grandmother Carol's letters, about the deaths in the family, about the curse." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Where did you find those letters?" "In the attic." She explains everything. "Dad, there's no curse. There never was. They were just terrible coincidences." Another silence, even longer. When Henry Maxwell finally spoke, his voice was laden with deep sadness. "I know, son. You know? I always knew. Your grandmother knew too. We found those letters years ago." Raphael felt the world spin around him. "And why did you never tell me?" "Because it was easier to believe in the curse than to accept that your mother died purely by chance. It was easier to have something to blame than to accept that sometimes bad things just happen for no reason." "But Dad—" "And because," Henry interrupted him, his voice broken, "it was easier to have you hating me for perpetuating a lie than seeing you leave to build a family I never had the courage to have again." Raphael was silent, processing his father's confession. "You were afraid I would leave if I knew the truth. I was afraid you would be happy away from me, that you would build a life full of laughter and children while I remained here, alone with my guilt. Dad, forgive me, Raphael. Forgive an old coward who turned the pain of loss into a prison for both of us." Raphael cried as he hadn't cried since childhood, releasing decades of guilt, fear, and resentment he had carried in his chest. He cried for the mother he never knew, for the father who had lived prisoner of his own pain, for himself and the wasted years, and especially for Marina, who had left because he couldn't overcome ghosts that didn't even exist. "Marina is pregnant, Dad," he said between sobs. "And you're scared." I am, but not of what you think." Raphael wiped his tears with the back of his hand. "I'm scared I've lost her forever, that I've ruined everything because of a lie." "Then go get her," Henry said softly. "Tell her the truth. Show her the letters. Fight for your family, son. Fight for the happiness I never had the courage to seek." "What if it's too late?" "Then at least you tried. It's more than I did." Raphael hung up the phone and sat in the dusty attic until the sun rose, rereading his great-grandmother's letters and planning how to win back the woman he loved. For the first time in weeks, he had hope. Not the blind hope that everything would work out, but the solid hope that he finally had a truth to offer in place of fear. He would spend the rest of his life trying to make up for the months of silence and absence. He would start that very day, driving to Brighton to tell Marina that he had found the cure for the curse that never existed, the courage to choose love instead of fear. Great-grandmother Carol's letters were carefully stored in a folder, along with the medical records she had collected over a century ago. Raphael would take everything to Marina, not as proof that he was right, but as an apology for having been so wrong for so long. The truth, finally, had set him free. Now he needed to find out if there was still time to set their love free, too. The journey from London to Brighton had never seemed so long. Raphael drove along the A23 motorway, with his great-grandmother's letters on the passenger seat, mentally rehearsing the words he would say to Marina. How to explain 3 weeks of silence. How to ask for forgiveness for choosing dead ghosts over the living woman carrying his child. How to convince her that he had changed when he himself was still processing the enormity of the discovery. Marina's sister's apartment was on a quiet street near the beach, in one of those 80s buildings that resisted time with dignity. Raphael parked across the street and watched the windows, trying to identify which room Marina would be staying in. He imagined her painting on the balcony with a sea view, or reading a pregnancy book in the living room armchair, or simply existing peacefully away from the toxicity he had created. He took a deep breath and crossed the street, carrying the folder with the documents like an offering of peace. He rang the doorbell and waited, his heart pounding erratically in his chest. Clara opened the door and looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and distrust. She was a few years younger than Marina, but had the same expressive brown eyes and the same direct way of looking at him without being intimidated. "Raphael, I didn't expect to see you here." "Hi, Clara. I know it's a surprise. I'd like to speak with Marina, if possible." Clara crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed by his presence. "She doesn't want to talk to you." "I know, and I understand perfectly, but I discovered some important things about my family, about the fears about everything that happened. I need to share this with her." "Raphael," Clara sighed. "Marina is trying to heal. She's trying to live this pregnancy with joy instead of terror. I don't know if it's a good idea. Please, just 5 minutes. If after that she wants me to leave, I will, but she needs to know what I've discovered." Clara studied him for a moment, probably weighing the risks of letting him in against the possibility that he genuinely had something important to say. "She's at the beach," she finally said. "She goes every morning to paint the sunrise. She'll be back for lunch soon. Can I wait for her here?" "You can, but Raphael." Clara looked him in the eyes seriously. "If you came here to convince her to come back without having resolved your issues, if you only came because you feel guilty, leave now. Marina doesn't need any more suffering." "I didn't come to convince her of anything," Raphael said honestly. "I came to ask for forgiveness, and to tell her a truth she deserves to know." Marina returned from the beach an hour later, carrying a portable easel and a small canvas still wet with paint. She wore a long white cotton dress that billowed in the sea breeze, and for the first time, Raphael could clearly see the gentle curve of her belly where his child was growing. The image hit him like a punch, not of terror, as he had always imagined would happen, but of a tenderness so intense that he had to lean against the wall to keep from swaying. Marina stopped when she saw him, her expression quickly changing from tranquility to guardedness. "What are you doing here, Raphael? I need to talk to you. I've discovered some important things." "Important for whom? For you or for me?" The coldness in her voice was justified, but it still hurt. Raphael approached slowly, showing his empty hands as proof he had no ill intentions. "Important for us, for our family, for the baby." Marina laughed without humor. "Our family? What family, Raphael? You fled our family at the first sign that it was becoming real." "You're right, completely right. But let me explain why. Let me show you what I've discovered." Marina looked at her sister, who gestured that she would let the two talk in private. "You can use the living room. I'll prepare lunch." They sat on the living room sofa, maintaining a safe distance from each other. Marina instinctively placed her hand on her belly, a protective gesture that Raphael noticed and that made him feel even more guilty. "How are you?" he asked. "Good. The baby's fine. 12 weeks now." 12 weeks, he repeated, doing the math. He had lost almost an entire month of his wife's pregnancy because of his own fear. "Raphael, why are you here? What have you discovered that's so important?" He opened the folder and carefully took out the letters. "I found these letters from my great-grandmother. She explains everything about the deaths in my family. About the curse." Marina frowned. "What kind of explanation?" "There's no curse, Marina. There never was. They were 3 separate medical tragedies, in different eras, for different reasons." Raphael handed the letters to her and watched as Marina read them, seeing the expressions change on her face as she absorbed great-grandmother Carol's words. When she finished, she was silent for long minutes, looking at the yellowed pages as if to make sure they weren't an illusion. "You knew," she said finally, not as a question but as an affirmation. "What do you mean?" "Somewhere inside you, you always knew it didn't make sense. 3 women in completely different eras, with completely different medical resources. You knew it wasn't a supernatural curse." Raphael lowered his head. "Maybe I knew, but it was easier to believe in the curse than to take responsibility for your own happiness," Marina completed. "It was easier to be a victim of cruel fate than to make courageous choices." "Yes." Marina stood up and walked to the window overlooking the sea. The breeze entered the room, bringing the smell of salt and seaweed that always calmed her. "My father knew too," Raphael continued. "We talked last night. He always knew the truth, but they preferred to perpetuate the lie because it was easier than dealing with reality. And what is the reality, Raphael? The reality is that I'm a coward. The reality is that I turned the happiest pregnancy of our lives into a nightmare because I preferred to live in fear than to live with hope. The reality is that you were right about everything, and I almost lost the woman I love and the child I always wanted because of my cowardice. Marina turned to face him, and Raphael saw that she was crying silently. "Do you know what hurt me the most?" she asked. "It wasn't the fear you felt. It was the way you treated me as if I were invisible, as if I didn't exist. I was going through the first months of pregnancy, with morning sickness, fatigue, hormonal changes, and I felt completely alone. The man I loved had become a stranger who could barely look at me. Marina, I stayed awake at night watching you sleep and wondering if you preferred that I really die, just to confirm your expectations and free you from the guilt of having to be happy." Her words hit Raphael like blades. "I never thought that. Not consciously, but unconsciously. Raphael, you were grieving for a person who was still alive. You were burying me before I even died." Raphael stood up and tried to approach her, but Marina raised her hand to stop him. "No, not now. I need to process all this. Marina, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I messed everything up, but I want to fight for us. I want to be the husband you deserve, the father our child deserves. Wanting is easy, Raphael. Doing is hard. Then give me a chance to do it. Give me a chance to prove I've changed." Marina was silent for a long moment, her hand still protecting her belly as she watched the waves break on the beach. "I have a doctor's appointment next Tuesday," she finally said. "Here in Brighton. It will be the first time I hear the baby's heartbeat. I would really like to go with you. It's not an invitation, Raphael. I'm just informing you. If you want to go, it will have to be on my terms. I don't want drama. I don't want anxiety. I don't want you panicking if something is different than expected. I accept any condition." Marina studied him for a moment, as if trying to see through his words to find out if the change was real. "There's a guest house 2 blocks from here. You can stay there until Tuesday. We can meet to talk, for you to get to know the baby better through the scans, to see if we can rebuild something of what we destroyed." Raphael nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and hope he hadn't experienced in weeks. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "I'm not giving you a chance, Raphael. I'm giving our child a chance to know their father. If that chance turns into something more, that will depend on you." Over the next 5 days, Raphael and Marina met every afternoon at the beach. He told her in detail about the discovery of the letters, about the conversation with his father, about how he had spent years of his life building an identity based on a lie. Marina spoke about how she had felt during the weeks of silence, about her own fears regarding motherhood, about how she had learned to be happy alone. On Tuesday, they went to the doctor's appointment together. Dr. Henry Oliver was an experienced obstetrician in his 50s who received Raphael with professional cordiality, but without hiding that he knew the couple's situation. "How are you feeling, Marina?" he asked, completely ignoring Raphael's presence. "Good. The morning sickness has decreased a lot. I'm able to eat better." "Excellent. And emotionally?" Marina glanced at Raphael before answering. "Better too. More stable." "That's good. Shall we see how our baby is doing?" During the ultrasound examination, Raphael held Marina's hand carefully, as if she were made of crystal. When the doctor found the baby's heart and they heard the fast and strong sound of the beats, Raphael cried openly for the first time in front of his wife since the pregnancy announcement. "Everything is perfect," Dr. Oliver announced. "Baby growing at the ideal rate, strong heart, all indicators normal." "Can I know the sex?" Marina asked. "It's still early, but if I had to bet, I'd say it's a girl." Raphael looked at Marina, who was smiling as she watched the blurry image on the ultrasound screen. A girl, his daughter. For the first time, he was able to think of the baby not as a threat to Marina's life, but as a real person who would soon be in their arms. "Marina," he said softly, still holding her hand, "can I ask you a question?" "You can. Would you forgive me if I spent the rest of my life trying to make up for these weeks of fear?" Marina looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Raphael, I don't need you to compensate for the past. I need you to be present in the future. Then stay with me. Come home. Let's raise our daughter together." Marina hesitated. "I'm still scared, Raphael. Scared that at the first difficulty you'll run away again. Scared that this change is only temporary." "Then let's do therapy together. Let's have psychological counseling throughout the pregnancy. Let's do whatever it takes for you to feel safe." Dr. Oliver, who had remained discreetly silent during the conversation, spoke up. "May I suggest something? I know it's none of my business, but I see many couples going through similar situations." They looked at him, waiting. Pregnancy is a period of intense changes, both physical and emotional. It's normal for old fears to resurface and for insecurities to expand, but it's also a period of opportunity. You can use these 9 months to rebuild your relationship on stronger foundations. "How so?" Raphael asked. "Rigorous obstetric care, so you feel medically safe. Couples therapy, to work through emotional issues, and patience. A lot of patience with yourselves and with each other." Marina looked at Raphael once more, weighing the options. "Would you agree to therapy?" "I'd agree to do anything, even if it meant talking about your mother, your childhood, all those issues you've always avoided." Raphael swallowed hard. "Especially that." "Then all right, let's try again, but Raphael." "Yes? Just one chance. If you run away again, if you choose fear over me again, there won't be a third opportunity." Raphael kissed her hand, feeling as if he was receiving the most precious gift in the world. "I won't need a third chance, I promise." 2 days later, they returned to London together. The return journey was different from the outbound one. They talked the whole way, planning changes to the house, discussing names for the baby, making plans for the future that included therapy, childbirth preparation classes, and a renovation of the baby's room. When they arrived at the mansion in Kensington, Raphael realized that the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. With Marina back, with the prospect of a daughter on the way, with the truth finally revealed, the place had transformed back into a home. That night, for the first time in weeks, they slept embracing. Raphael placed his hand on Marina's belly and whispered an apology to the daughter who was still growing, promising that he would be a present, courageous, and loving father. The healing had begun, but there would still be challenges to face. The following months were a mix of gradual healing and discoveries about themselves that neither Raphael nor Marina had imagined they would need to make. Couples therapy revealed layers of issues that went far beyond the family curse. Raphael had spent his entire life avoiding real emotional intimacy, using work and responsibilities as a shield against vulnerability. Marina, in turn, discovered that she also carried fears about motherhood that she had minimized to appear stronger than she truly was. Dr. Marcus Riley, the psychotherapist accompanying the couple, had a direct approach that initially bothered Raphael but gradually helped him dismantle the defenses he had built over decades. "You've turned trauma into identity," he said during a particularly intense session. "The pain of losing your mother became who you are, instead of something that happened to you. And now that you've discovered you can leave that pain behind, you're afraid of not knowing who you are without it." Raphael was silent for long minutes, processing the words. "It's like I don't know how to be happy without feeling guilty about it." "Exactly. You need to learn that happiness is not a betrayal of your mother's memory. It's an honor to the life she gave you." Marina, beside him on the consultation room sofa, held his hand. In the last 2 months, she had learned to offer support without taking on the responsibility of healing him, an important distinction that therapy had taught them both. "And you, Marina," Dr. Riley turned to her, "discovered that you have a dread of being abandoned during pregnancy, not just because of Raphael's behavior, but because of your own family history." Marina nodded. During the sessions, she had recalled how her father had left her when she was 80, leaving home without explanation and appearing only sporadically during her childhood. The possibility of raising a daughter alone awakened old terrors she had pushed into her subconscious. "We are building a family on the rubble of our families of origin," she said. "It's terrifying and liberating at the same time." The pregnancy progressed without major medical complications, but not without emotional challenges. Raphael had a few anxiety attacks when Marina was in her late second trimester, moments when all the old fears returned like giant waves. But now he had tools to deal with these episodes. He called his therapist, talked openly with Marina about what he was feeling, and most importantly, he didn't run away. Marina also had her difficult moments. There was a night in the 6th month when she woke in a panic, convinced that Raphael would change his mind about being a father, when the reality of the child became more concrete. Instead of keeping these fears to herself, as she used to, she woke him up, and they talked until dawn about insecurities and hopes. "Sometimes I'm afraid I won't be a good mother," she confessed, lying on his lap as they watched the sunrise from the bedroom window. "Why? Because I didn't have much of an example. My mother was great, but she raised 3 daughters practically alone after my father left. I always saw her exhausted, stressed, with no time for herself. I'm afraid of losing myself in motherhood." Raphael caressed her hair. "You won't get lost. And even if you do for a while, I'll be here to remind you of who you are. Promise?" "I promise. And do you promise you'll give me a few slaps if I start panicking when it's time for the birth?" Marina laughed. "I promise I'll give you preventive slaps, just to be sure." In the 7th month, they discovered that the baby was indeed a girl, confirming Dr. Oliver's suspicion. They chose the name Helen, a tribute to Raphael's mother, but this time imbued with hope instead of mourning. "Eleanor gave her life to bring me into the world," Raphael said when they suggested the name. "Helen will receive life from us. It's as if we're completing a circle, but in a different way." Raphael became completely involved in the preparations. He personally renovated the baby's room, painting the walls a soft shade of yellow and installing shelves for the books he had already started buying. Marina painted a mural on one of the walls, an abstract family tree where each leaf represented a generation of the family, but this time growing towards the light instead of bending under the weight of the past. He also started cooking, something he had never done in his life. Every afternoon, he would return home from work early to prepare elaborate dinners for Marina, who was having difficulty eating certain foods because of the pregnancy. He discovered he liked the precision that cooking required, the way small attentions transformed into something nutritious and pleasurable. "You're turning into a domestic man," Marina joked one night, watching him prepare a pumpkin risotto with surgical care. "I'm turning into a present man," he corrected. "It's different." In the 8th month, Marina developed gestational diabetes, a condition that required constant monitoring of blood sugar levels and dietary changes. The diagnosis brought back some of Raphael's old fears, but this time he dealt with them in a completely different way. "So we're going to research everything about gestational diabetes," he said on the way back from the medical appointment where they received the diagnosis. "We're going to talk to specialists, make a strict meal plan, monitor everything necessary." "Raphael, are you okay with this? I know any pregnancy complication must trigger anxiety." "Of course it does. But anxiety isn't the same as paralyzing terror. I can be worried and still act constructively." And that's exactly what they did. Raphael hired a nutritionist specializing in pregnancy. They reorganized the house pantry to facilitate Marina's new diet, and he learned to administer insulin injections when she needed them. "It's funny," Marina commented one night as he checked her glucose levels. "Months ago you ran away when I mentioned the pregnancy. Now you're here giving me insulin without batting an eye." "It's the difference between running from fear and facing fear," Raphael said, noting the numbers in a small notebook he religiously kept updated. "Running from fear paralyzes you. Facing fear empowers you." The final stretch of pregnancy brought an intimacy between them that even the first years of marriage had not provided. Raphael frequently placed his hand on Marina's belly to feel Helen move, talked to his daughter through her skin, sang songs he made up on the spot. Marina painted a series of canvases documenting the last months, Raphael sleeping with his hand on her belly, the two dancing slowly in the living room during a practice contraction, him assembling the crib with an expression of absolute concentration. "You're documenting our healing," he observed, looking at the canvases lined up in the studio. "I'm documenting our rebirth," she corrected. "All of us are being reborn. You and me, Helen. We are a completely new family." Labor began on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before the due date. Marina woke with regular contractions and, instead of panicking, calmly woke Raphael and said, "I think Helen decided today's the day." Raphael had imagined he would despair when the moment came, but he found he was surprisingly calm, All the fears and anxieties of the past months had been processed in therapy sessions, in late-night conversations, in months of careful preparation. "Ready?" he asked, helping her get dressed. "Ready," she replied, smiling even through a contraction. The birth was long, but without serious complications. Raphael remained by Marina's side throughout the process, holding her hand, offering water, massaging her back, being exactly the partner she needed. When the contractions intensified and Marina began to tire, he whispered in her ear the words that had become their mantra. "We are stronger together than apart." But at the end of labor, there was a complication. Marina's blood pressure rose dangerously during the expulsive stage, and the medical team had to act quickly to avoid risks to both mother and baby. For a few eternal minutes, Raphael found himself facing the real possibility of losing Marina, and all the family ghosts threatened to return. The difference was that this time he was not alone with his fears. He had a competent medical team, modern technology, and most importantly, he had developed emotional resources to face the crisis instead of being paralyzed by it. "Dr. Stone," he addressed the obstetrician, "what can I do to help?" "Keep talking to her. Keep her calm. We're going to perform an episiotomy to speed up the birth and reduce the pressure." Raphael held Marina's face in his hands. "Look at me, my love. It's almost over. Helen is almost here. You are the strongest woman I know, and we're going to get through this together." Marina was exhausted and scared, but managed to focus on his gaze. "Promise you'll take care of her if anything happens to me." "Nothing will happen to you, but I promise I'll take care of both of you for the rest of my life." 15 minutes later, Helen was born. 3.2 kilograms of pure life, screaming with enough force to fill the entire birthing suite. Marina was well. Her blood pressure had normalized, and Raphael cried like a child when he held his daughter in his arms for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching the tiny fingers that automatically closed around his thumb. "She's ours," Marina said, smiling through tears of exhaustion and relief. That night, while Marina rested and Helen slept in the bassinet beside the hospital bed, Raphael called his father. "Dad, Helen was born. She's fine. Marina's fine. We're fine." Henry Maxwell cried on the other end of the line. "The curse is over, son." "There was no curse, Dad. There were just people who needed to learn to choose love instead of fear." 6 months later, Raphael was in the art gallery garden where he had met Marina, holding Helen as he watched his wife hang paintings for a solo exhibition. The show was called Rebirth and told the visual story of their transformation, from the dark canvases of the period when they were separated to the vibrant colors of the last months of pregnancy and first months of motherhood. Helen had become a calm and curious baby, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's expressive smile. Raphael discovered that being a father was simultaneously more terrifying and more natural than he had ever imagined. He woke up during late-night feedings without complaining, changed diapers with the same precision he applied to business, and sang lullabies he invented, mixing Portuguese and English in a melody only Helen seemed to understand. "You've turned into a completely crazy dad," Marina said, approaching him in the garden. "I've turned into a complete man," he corrected, kissing Helen's forehead. "It took me 32 years, but I finally discovered that life isn't a sentence to be served. It's a blessing to be lived." Marina leaned against him, watching the first stars appear in the London sky. "It was worth fighting for us." "It was worth learning to fight," Raphael said. "To fight for the present instead of running from the past." Helen made a soft little sound in her sleep, and they both smiled, recognizing in that simple sound all the music of the future they had almost lost because of ghosts that didn't even exist. 3 years later, when Marina became pregnant again, Raphael felt a brief moment of ancestral anxiety, but this time, instead of running away or being paralyzed, he hugged Marina and said, "We're going to have another miracle," and they did. A boy this time, named Michael, who was born without complications on a sunny spring morning. Helen, then 3.5 years, held her little brother with grown-up care and declared that she would protect him forever. Raphael looked at the family he had created, Marina radiant even after childbirth, Helen humming a song to her brother, Michael sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, and realized he had discovered the secret that generations of his family had never known. We are not prisoners of the past. We are authors of the future. And sometimes, when we have enough courage to choose love instead of fear, we can write happy endings even for stories that began with tragedy. The Maxwell curse had ended not because it was broken, but because it was understood. It had never existed. What had always existed was the possibility of choice, and Raphael had finally learned to choose life.